Hey class, how are you? Welcome to lecture. Today we're going to be discussing more vocabulary terms, visual vocabulary terms that are going to help us describe what we see and also articulate what we're doing in our exercises. This lecture is going to be divided into two parts. The first part is going to be I'm going to visit the introduction to our book, 2D Design Handbook. I'm going to sort of jump back to that, and we talk about sort of zooming out into broader spectrum of like how people think about the two-dimensional visual art field and how to describe it and how to look at it and how to think about it. And then afterwards, I'm going to read a section from Itten, Elements of Color, which is more practical. And it's a section that I really love, and it's called The Theory of Color Expression. And it really sort of verbally and poetically goes into how different colors work together and also what sort of symbolic effects they have on our psyche. And that will lead us into the assignment, which is going to be centered around color mixing to create specific color effects and relationships. So look forward to that at the end. Cool. So here we are in the introduction to 2D design. So in order to talk about 2D design, first we have to agree upon some terms. Much like numbers in math, the agreed upon terms become the coordinates for a work of art, so that you can talk about what is working or what is not working and how you can adjust it. So you can describe how to make somebody see it who is not looking at it in their mind's eye. Think of it like this. You are visiting an alien planet, and you have come back to Earth to describe exactly what you saw. On this planet, you do not know the names, uses, or histories of anything, so you do have to use basic terms to talk about what you saw. The size of things, the color of things, the texture of things, the light, examples like that. So in order to describe what it is that we are seeing, we must practice how to talk about works of art. We must boil down some universal terms that we can all agree upon. So this next section is meant to be a guide to universal art terminology that we'll be using when talking about 2D art. So first, we have to talk about the two biggest divisions in works of art. There's form and content. Content is the idea, subject, or narrative aspect of a work of art. It is the recognizable imagery that we all draw associations from. Form is the structure and the parts that make up the larger composition, like colors, lines, and shapes. In some works of art, the form is the subject of the work itself. In this painting on the left by Kazimir Malevich, form in this painting is made up of the various rectangles and one green circle. Form is also the arrangement of those parts, where the largest shape is alone at the top, while the other shapes are grouped together in the lower part of the painting. Content is what those shapes make us think of based on their size, placement, color, and once we realize that, the title of the painting is A Painterly Realism of a Football Player, the title helps us draw a connection between the form and the artist's intent. Now, formalism is the analysis of the forms themselves, the elements and the design. In a formal analysis, it is an in-depth discussion about a work of art and all of the observable parts. For the most part, form is always in the service of content, but not necessarily. Form is what makes you think about the content, and therefore will be primarily focused in a two-dimensional design. For example, color is a formal aspect of a work of art, but whether we choose red or blue can drastically affect how we interpret the content of the piece. A side note on form is that it can also be defined as an object within form, which refers to the object's implied or actual three-dimensional appearance. So on the painting on the left, The Vase by Paul Klee, the formal analysis of this painting would be how it has a rectangular format. That's sort of a tall rectangle. It has a blue-gray color against the background with different size shapes of light blue, light green, yellow, brown, and black floating on it. There is even a placement of varying size shapes throughout the composition. The largest shapes are long and thin, and all the shapes seem to have a light halo around them. The only grouping of similar shapes is in the lower middle area of the canvas. They have a similar size, yellow color, round shapes, and are in close proximity to each other. They also contain inside a larger light area that is framed by a thin, long black shape on one side, which gives the area a high level of importance, and so on. So that's just how, in this book, Paul Klee's painting is described. I would go on to say that the large shape in the bottom, which is a sort of bell-shaped white area with yellow circular forms and a long sort of black thick outline around the right side, that emphasizes the most strongest contrast point in the biggest shape in the piece, which leads our eyes down there and creates a bottom-heavy quality to the piece. While on the left, the elevated floating black shape gives the piece a kind of airiness and sort of explosive direction. Along with form and content, there are another set of terms that we have to discuss in order to have a formal analysis of a work of art. And those are terms that are subjective is one and objective is the other. Subjective versus objective. Subjective is the individual reaction or feeling that the viewer gets from a work of art, and objective is the concrete observable facts that can be agreed upon by all viewers. The formal aspects of a work of art are usually considered objective, while the idea or concept behind it is often thought of as subjective. This painting on the left, The Young Girl Defending Herself Against Eros by Bouguereau. Objectively, this painting is a beautifully rendered depiction of a young woman being harassed by cherubs, but subjectively, it is up for the viewer to decide if they think it is a good painting. During the modernist period of art, Bouguereau's paintings fell out of favor because of the rise of photography. Ideas took precedent over the ability to realistically render the figure. Many considered this painting to be too sappy and conceptually shallow, like a poem on Valentine's Day. What do you guys think? Concept is the main idea or theme that a work of art is organized around or inspired by. The form, content, narrative, and overall structure of the composition should all be in service to convey the artist's concept. The formal aspect of a work of art can influence how we feel about what we are seeing. For example, blood red liquid versus a blue liquid. But how we interpret what we see is largely dependent on our background and the context from which we see the work. It has a lot to do with our cultural background, our upbringing, our worldview. It'll change your perception of the concept behind a piece. And sometimes artworks don't always speak universally. They speak to specific cultures, they speak to specific groups, age groups, all that sort of thing should be taken into consideration when thinking about what the concept of the piece is. The concept behind this painting by Ong is pronounced Ingres. The concept behind this painting is much like a political propaganda of any time period, trying to show that the ruler is someone special who should be followed, typically a lie. Propaganda is a type of artwork that is designed to communicate something that the government or a ideology wants you to subscribe to. Rather than a straightforward portrait of a king, this painting puts the emphasis on Mary and the baby Jesus, trying to show that the king is blessed by the fact that he was chosen by God. Context is important as well. Context is the part or parts of a work of art that shed light on its meaning and affects the viewer's interpretation, such as a fancy frame versus a painting on a brick wall. Also, the environment that the artwork is shown gives a certain context and therefore changes our interpretations of the artwork. For example, a painting hung in a museum, like the painting above, is different from the painting by Banksy on the lower right, done on a dirty wall. There are certain aspects of art that we can observe right away that provide further context, such as medium, technique, style, narrative, genre, and appropriation. What do you guys think? How does the context of looking at a museum painting in a big gallery with a nice frame differ from the experience of seeing a beautiful piece of graffiti art on a wall? How does that context affect the meaning and of the piece? What do you guys think? Some examples of different mediums that can affect the context include oil painting, acrylic painting, watercolor, fresco, or digital. There's also printmaking. Photography affects the context. Drawing, graphite, illustration, and animation. A lot of times artists will be, when they think about the best way to make a piece, they'll think about the materials and what the materials are saying as strongly as how they're applied and also the element and how the composition is. The context and materials have a lot of power. Technique. Technique is a way that an artist chooses to apply the medium of their choice, which, as I said, has a lot of power on its own. For example, they could use dots like pointillism, little dots clustered together to create the full picture, or loose, fluid brushstrokes of abstract expressionism. In these two paintings on the left, Seurat and Signac are both using a technique we call pointillism. Small dots or dabs of paint, when placed next to each other, form the total image. But you can see that there are subtle visual differences between how the two artists apply this technique. These differences are what we might call the artist's style. Now, style is the distinctive way that particular artist or group of artists choose to create their art or depict their subject. It is the characteristics and techniques that are specific to the artists and make their work different, even from other artists working in a very similar way. There are numerous ways that a style can be represented. For example, an artist can choose to depict their subject matter in a blocky or cubist way, a loose or expressionistic way, or a slick photorealistic way. An artist's style can even just be specific to the colors they tend to use. They can limit their color palette and help that build their style. My opinion on style is that it is, for me, it's ever changing. My style comes with technique, because in order to do a style that is intentional, that communicates a certain thing, you have to have the technique available to physically do that style. Some artists develop a style that is very specific and unique to themselves. They kind of invent it, and that's a very special thing when an artist kind of has their own style that is so distinct from others. Or art movements also can create a style and really kind of own it, like the Cubists, as exemplified in these top two paintings on the right. Actually, the painting on the right by Pablo Picasso, Girl with a Mandolin, that is a Cubist work, and Umberto Bocchini's work is on the left. That is a futurist work. A little bit different, but share a lot of stylistic similarities. Artists often refer to or are inspired by works of other artists' imagery, technique, or style. They will often do visual quoting, where they make a direct copy of elements or structures from the other artist's artwork. This quoting is called appropriation. In most cases, the artist recontextualizes or transforms the original, but the original is still often identifiable within the piece. It is much like when a musician or hip-hop artist samples the music of another artist in their song. Zoe Frank's painting Brunch on the left, you can see, is appropriating the composition and also some specific faces from Velázquez's painting on the top. Narrative comes from the idea of narration or storytelling. So the narrative in a work of art is when there is some kind of story or event that is being represented in the artwork. For example, famously by David, Death of Socrates. The narrative of this painting by David is the death of the philosopher Socrates. He has been convicted of corrupting the youth and sentenced to death by drinking a poison called hemlock. In this painting, Socrates calmly accepts his sentence with his followers and students surrounding him in mourning. This is a famous painting and a famous story about the defiance of death and telling your truth and telling the truth and examining the world as being always sort of death-defying feat in the face of the total status quo, all the way back during the Greek period. Genre. The genre of an artwork is how the work is categorized. It's like how you would label it. Genres are very fluid. You can be multiple genres at once. You can bend genres. But just for example, the genre of painting could be a landscape painting genre, still life, portrait, allegory, abstraction, surreal, realism, non-representational, and many others, as are exemplified in the selection of paintings on the left. So realism. Realism is something that closely represents something identifiable in nature or real life. While non-representational art has no references to nature, there are many forms of realism in art. There is regular realism, which refers to the depiction of scenes or objects, everyday life, as opposed to idealized or expressive depictions. Photorealism, which are usually paintings or drawings that look as if they could be photographs, and hyperrealism, like the paintings of blood oranges seen here. Hyperrealism refers to works of art that can seem to be more intense focus on the detail that can be achieved from a regular photograph. So hyperrealism is a lot of painting is in response to the technology of photographs, because during the end of the 1800s, when photographs became a prominent technology and slowly evolved into an art form, they weren't really an art form at first. They were more seen as a sort of scientific, curiosity or phenomenon. But they did affect painters. So a lot of painting since the early 1900s is in response to photography, trying to do something with paint that photographs cannot do. The artist tries to capture the depth of visual information and lets the viewer feel they are seeing a common subject with new eyes. The genre of abstract art has created some confusion because for many people the term abstraction has come to be used to also describe non-representational art. But abstraction means to abstract something. So if you were to take a portrait of a person and make it less realistic, like a cubist portrait by Picasso, then that is said to be an abstraction of the original person. On the other hand, non-representational is not supposed to be representing anything. Every work of art sits on a spectrum somewhere between representational on one end and non-representational on the other end. So when a person refers to a non-representational work of art as abstraction, they are saying that it has been abstracted from something in nature, when that may or may not be the case. It may seem like splitting hairs, and it may be, but since art is about communication, it is good to be aware of what you are saying. On the left, there are three sort of versions of abstraction. On the top left, by Jean Vanderlyn, you might not call that an abstraction. But because it's paint on canvas and it's a representation of a different thing, the person, in this case the portrait of the artist, the very fact that the paint is laid on the canvas, these are mixed pigments, they're colors in relationship to each other. They're not the actual person. Just as right now I'm talking to you, my voice is an abstraction of my original voice because it's been processed through a different medium, the digital medium of this sound recording. On the bottom left, the woman with the blue eyes is further abstracted. It's adding more basic forms, sort of leaving the human face into ovals and big shapes of black color. And then on the right by Paul Klee, you have a face that's abstracted even further. So the top left is representational and the bottom right is abstract, but both are involved in abstraction. The formal aspects of a work of art can be simplified into two categories as well. First is the individual parts of the composition, which we call the visual elements of art. We covered that in last week's lecture. The second is the arrangement of those elements, which we call composition. We're going to cover that in the following lectures. Composition is how the elements are organized in order to convey a larger idea. The word composition as art is often used synonymously with the word design, or the overall design of a work of art. A work of art is more than just the parts that make it up. The parts fuse together to communicate some larger message, which we call gestalt. Gestalt is the idea that the final product is more than the sum of its parts. For example, the human body. The human body is made up of trillions of cells, but a human being is more than just the quantity of cells. So with a work of art, we are communicating something to the viewer larger than just the colors and shapes that are arranged on the flat piece of paper. We use the design principles that we're going to get into later as tools to help us understand that we can communicate very different things depending on how we change the relationship between the elements of our composition. Different books or websites will give you different lists of what the elements and principles of art are, but I'm not trying to get caught up in every single one. A lot of it is going to be up to you, the artists, what to use, what you like, what feels comfortable, what gets you into that state of creative flow. Because at the end of the day, the worker, the artist, is the one who's channeling the world of forms and their own ideas, their own intellect into the works of art. But I hope this little lecture helped us formulate some grammar to create sentences that will help us communicate the bigger message of what we are trying to do. So now I'm going to switch to a little text from Itten. And this is, if you guys want to take a little break, this is a good moment to do that and restart the video. All right, let's get started. This chapter is called The Theory of Color Expression, and it's going to coincide, as I said, with the assignment we're doing this week. I hope you enjoy it very much. It's a bit more poetic. The optical, electromagnetic, and chemical processes initiated in the eye and brain are frequently paralleled by processes in the psychological realm. Such reverberations of the experience of color may be propagated to the innermost centers, thereby affecting principal areas of mental and emotional experience. Goethe spoke of ethico-aesthetic activity of colors. By careful analysis, I shall try to elucidate this topic so important to the color artist. Let me tell you a story. A businessman was entering a party of ladies and gentlemen at dinner. The arriving guests were greeted by delicious smells issuing from the kitchen, and all were eagerly anticipating the meal. As the happy company assembled about the table, laden with good things, goodies, and treats, the host flooded the apartment with red light. The meat suddenly looked rare and appetizing enough, but the spinach turned black, and the potatoes were bright red. Before the guests had recovered from their astonishment, the red light changed to blue. The roast assumed an aspect of putrefaction, and the potatoes looked moldy. All the diners lost their appetite at once, but when the yellow light was turned on, transforming the claret into castor oil and the company into cadavers, some of the more delicate ladies hastily rose and left the room. No one could think of eating, though all present knew it was only a change in the color of the lighting. The host laughingly turned the white lights on again, and soon the good spirits of the gathering were restored. Who can doubt what colors exert profound influences on them, whether we are aware of them or not? The deep blue of the sea and the distant mountains enchants us. The same blue as an interior seems uncanny, lifeless, and terrifying. Blue reflections on the skin render it pale, as if moribund, and in the dark of night a blue neon light is attractive. Like blue on black, and in conjunction with red and blue lights, it lends a cheerful, lively tone. A blue sun-filled sky has an active and enlivening effect, whereas the mood of the moonlight blue sky is passive and evokes subtle nostalgias. Redness in the face denotes wrath or fever, a blue, green, or yellow complexion, sickness, though there is nothing sickly about the pure colors on their own. That's only in the case of the context in which they appear on the face. A red sky threatens bad weather. A blue, green, or yellow sky promises fair weather. On the basis of these experiences of nature, it would seem all but impossible to formulate simple and true propositions about the expressive content of colors, because all of them rely on the context in which they exist and their interrelationship with each other. Yellow shadows, violet light, blue-green fire, red-orange ice are effects in apparent contradiction with experience and give an otherworldly impression. Only those deeply responsive can experience the tonal values or single or simultaneous colors without reference to objects. Musical experience is denied to those with no ear for music. For example, of the four seasons shows what color, sensation, and experience have objective correlatives, even though each individual sees, feels, and evaluates color in a very personal way. I have often maintained that the judgment pleasing and displeasing can be no valid criticism of true and correct coloration. A serviceable yardstick is obtained only if we base each judgment on the relation position of each color with respect to its adjacent color and the tonality of colors. Stated in terms of the four seasons, this means that for each season we are to find these colors, those points on and in the color sphere that distinctly belong to the expression of that season in their relation to the whole universe of colors. The youthful light, radiant generation of nature in spring is expressed by luminous colors. Yellow is the color nearest to white light, and yellow-green is the intensification. Light pink and light blue tones amplify and enrich the chord. Yellow, pink, and lilac are often seen in the buds of plants. The colors of autumn contrast most sharply with those of spring. In autumn, the green of vegetation dies out, to be broken down and decomposed into dull brown and violet. The promise of spring is fulfilled in the maturity of summer. Nature in summer, thus materially outward into a maximum luxuriance of form and color, attains extreme density and vividly plastic fullness of powers. Warm, saturated, active colors, to be found at their peak in only one particular region of the color sphere, offer themselves in the expression of summer. For contrasts with an amplification of these principal colors, their complements will of course be required. To represent winter, typifying passivity in nature by a contracting inward movement of the forces of the earth. We require colors connoting withdrawn, cold, centripetal radiance, transparency, and rarefaction. The majestic cycle of respiration performed by nature in these four phases can hence be clearly and objectively represented in color. But unless we apply reason to the choice of color combinations, keeping the total universe of color before us, we shall find none but primitive and private solutions, and miss those of general truth and validity. In order to gain an understanding of each hue in its unique psychological expressive value, let us relate it to the other hues. To avoid error insofar as possible, we must know, when mentioning any color, precisely what chroma and what tone are meant, and what color is to be related. When I say red, I must specify which red, as well as the color to be related to it. A yellowish red, such as red-orange, is different in species from a bluish red, and red-orange on lemon-yellow is again a very different matter from the red-orange on black, or its equal brilliance lilac. I shall now try to relate the hues yellow, red, blue, orange, violet, and green as represented and defined in the 12-hue color circle, and to describe their mental and emotional expressive values. Yellow. Yellow is the most light-giving of all hues. It loses this trait the moment we shade it with gray, black, or violet. Violet is the complement of yellow. Yellow is, as it were, a denser material white. The further this yellow light is drawn into the denseness of matter, of opacity, the more it is assimilated to yellow-orange, orange and red-orange. Our red is the stopping point of yellow, with which it is not visibly tinged. In the center of the yellow to red band, we have orange, as the strongest and most concentrated interpenetrable of the light and matter. Golden yellow suggests the highest sublimation of matter by the power of light. Impalpably radiant, lacking transparency, but weightless as a pure vibration, gold was formerly much used in painting. It signifies luminous, light-emitting matter. The golden domes of Byzantine mosaics and the backgrounds of the paintings of the early masters were symbols of the beyond, the marvelous, the kingdom of sun and light. The golden ore of saints is the token of their transfiguration. The attainment of this state was conceived by it and enveloped by light. This heavenly light could not be symbolized except by gold. In common speech, to see the light means to be brought to a realization of previously hidden truth. To say that someone is bright is to credit him with intelligence. So yellow, the brightest and lightest color, pertains symbolically to understanding, knowledge. In Grunewald's conception, the risen Christ ascends in the glory of yellow. Yellow is used in the sense of celestial light in Altdorfer's Madonna and Child in Angels. Just as there is but one truth, so there is only one yellow. Adulterated truth is the vitiated truth, or untruth. So the expressions of diluted yellow are envy, betrayal, falseness, doubt, distrust, and unreason. So diluted yellow here is referred to when you add black, white, or gray, or violet, thus making it muddled, not its pure vibrancy. So the expressions of diluted yellow are thus: in Giotto's taking of Christ and in Holbein's Last Supper, Judas is shown in dim yellow. The gray-yellow cloak of the female figure in the stripping of Christ by El Greco has a particularly mistrustful effect. On the other hand, yellow is radiantly cheerful when contrasted with dark tones. With yellow on pink, the radiance of the yellow is subdued. That's because yellow and pink share a similar value. When yellow on orange, the yellow looks purer, lighter orange. The two colors together are like strong morning sun on ripening wheat fields. Yellow on the green gives a radiant effect, outshining the green. Since green is a mixture of yellow and blue, the yellow is among friends. Yellow on violet has an extreme strength of character, hard and inexorable. Yellow on medium blue is radiant, but alien and repellent in effect. Sentimental blue will be readily tolerant with the bright wit of yellow. Yellow on red is loud, joyful, and noisy, like trumpets on Easter morning. Its splendor sends forth a mighty knowledge of affirmation. Yellow on white is dim without radiance. The white forces it into a subservient position. Yellow shows its bright and most aggressive luminosity on black. It is vigorous and sharp, uncompromisingly abstract. The various effects of yellow will illustrate the difficulty of defining the expressive properties of color in general terms without direct intuition. Red. The red on the 12-hue color wheel is neither yellowish nor bluish. It irresistibly radiates and is not easily eclipsed, and yet it's extraordinarily flexible. Bordering on diverse characters, it is very sensitive when it shifts into yellow or into blue. Both yellowish, red, and bluish unfold great capacity for modulation. Red-orange is dense and opaque, glowing as if filled with inner warmth. The warmness of red is intensified to fiery strength in red-orange. It is symbolically comparable to vitalized earth. Red-orange light promotes vegetable growth and the organic function. Proper contrasting turns orange-red into an expression of feverish, belligerent passion. Associated with the planet Mars, red is bound into the burning worlds of war and demons. It was worn as a sign of material occupation by warriors in combat. It has been the badge of revolutions. Passionate, physical love grows forth in red-orange. Blue, red, purple connotes spiritual love. On orange, red-orange seems smoldering, dark and lifeless, as if parched. Right now I'm describing orange in relationship to other colors. This is, so orange, so this is describing red-orange on orange. So on orange, red-orange seems smoldering, dark, and lifeless, as if parched. If the orange is deepened to dark brown, the fire of the red flares with a dry heat. It is only in contrast with black that fire red develops its utmost unconquerable demonic passion. On green, red-orange is the impudent, rash intruder, loud and common. On green-blue, red-orange is like a blazing fire. On cold red, it drops back to a subdued glow, driving the red to active resistance. The different effects of red-orange in our examples are only a suggestion of its expressive potentialities. Unlike yellow, red has a great wealth of modulations because it can be widely varied between cold and warm, dull and clear, light and dark, without destroying its character of redness. From demonic, sinister red-orange on black to sweet angelic pink, red can express all intermediate degrees between the infernal and the sublime. Only the ethereal, transparent, aerial is barred to it. There blue reigns supreme. Blue. Blue, pure blue, is a color containing no trace of yellow or red. As red is always active, blue is passive. From the point of view of material space, from the point of view of spiritual immateriality, blue seems active and red passive. Blue is always cold and red is always warm. Blue is contracted, introverted, as red is associated with blood, and so is blue with the nervous system. Blue is power, like that of nature in winter, when all germination and growth is hidden in darkness and silence. Blue is always shadowy, and it tends in its greatest glory to darkness. It is an intangible nothing, and yet present at the transparent atmosphere in In the atmosphere of the earth, blue appears from the lightest azure to the deepest blue-black of the night sky. Blue beckons our spirits with the vibrations of faith into the infinite distances of spirit. Signifying faith to us, for the Chinese, it symbolizes immortality. Turquoise blue and opal also have their own spiritual significances, particularly within Mayan and Aztec cultures. Turquoise is a powerful blue that has an interpretation separate from North American interpretations. When blue is dimmed, it falls into superstition, fear, grief, and perdition, but it always points to the realm of the transcendental. In the following section, it shows the changes in the effect of blue within the greater changing color contrast. Blue on yellow has a very dark effect indeed, devoid of radiance. Where bright intellect rules, faith appears dull and obscure. When the blue is lightened to the same brilliance as yellow, it casts a cold light. Its transparency demotes yellow to a dense material hue. On black, blue gleams in bright, pure strength. Where black ignorance holds sway, the blue of pure faith shines like a distant light. If we set blue on lilac, it appears withdrawn, inane, and impotent. The lilac takes from it all significance by right of greater material strength, of practical faith. When the lilac is darkened, the blue takes back its luster. On dark brown, or dull orange, blue is excited into a strong, vibrant tremor. The brown simultaneously awakens it into a live color. The blue that was dead is resurrected by the power of blue. Blue on the red-orange retains its dark figure, yet becomes luminous, asserting and maintaining its strange unreality. On quiet green, our blue is markedly shifted towards red. It's as if the green, which is further from red than blue is, because it's complementary color, it sort of livens the redness of the blue. Only by this evasion can it escape from the paralyzing saturation of the green and return to active life. The retiring nature of blue is meekness and profound faith, are frequently encountered in paintings of the Annunciation, the Virgin, awakening inward, wears blue. A fine example is Roger van der Weyden's Altar of the Epiphany. Green. Green is the intermediate between yellow and blue. Accordingly, as green contains more yellow or more blue, depending, the character of its expression changes. Green is one of the secondary colors produced by mixing the two primaries, yellow and blue. It's an operation difficult to perform in such a way that neither component predominates. So a green is never a green as blue as blue. Green is always a bit bluish or a bit yellowish. Green is the color of the vegetable kingdom, the mysterious chlorophyll which populates all plants on our planet and involves photosynthesis. When light comes to the earth and water and air release their elements, that incarnate sentience puts forth green. Fruitfulness and contentment, tranquility and hope are expressive values of green, the fusion and interpretation of knowledge and faith. When luminous green is dulled by gray, a series of sad decay easily results. If green inclines towards yellow, coming within the range of yellow-green, we feel the young, vernal force of nature. A spring or early summer morning with yellow-green, without hope and joy for the fruits of summer, is unthinkable. Yellow-green may be activated to the utmost by orange, though it is then readily assuming a coarse, vulgar cast. If green inclines towards blue, its spiritual components are augmented, as I spoke about in turquoise, the blue-green. Spiritual. Manganese blue represents the richest hue of blue-green. This ice blue is the cold pole, as red-orange is the warm pole of our color world. In antithesis to green and blue, it has a cold, vigorous aggressiveness. The range of modulation of green is very broad and may differentiate expressive values that can be obtained by variations in contrast. So let's take a look. If you guys want to pause the video, take a short break, this would also be a good time to do it. And I'm going to open up the assignment for the week, followed by a demo. So this week's assignment is called Color Interaction Groups. The goal of this assignment is to practice color mixing and to practice laying flat shapes of color directly next to each other to create effects of color interaction practically. You're going to be using acrylic paint, you're going to be using your brushes, palette knife, palette paper, and the goal of it is to get into it and sort of understand the technique of manipulating the material of pigmented color. So, the instructions. First, choose a color with a strong, vibrant mid-value. We can call this color the protagonist hue, the color that will be all affected optically but remain unchanged. You can mix or you can use a color straight from the tube, and maybe even with a little white if you'd like. Depending on if you choose violet, you could pop it with a little white. In my choice, I combined a little blue and a little green to make this nice turquoise, greenish turquoise color. But I recommend primaries are great for this assignment if you just want to keep it super simple. Next, you draw 3 pairs of 2 by 2 inch squares evenly on a piece of canvas paper. Label them pairs A, B, and C. So I want you to use a ruler. I want you to take your time and measure perfectly 2 by 2 inch squares. Doesn't have to be 2 inch by 2 inch, but they do have to be squares, and make sure the lines are straight and clean because I'm going to have you guys practice applying clean lines. Apply the protagonist color. So for pair A, apply the protagonist color in a shape. In this case, it's a square at the center of your 2 inch by 2 inch square. Apply 2 colors of drastically opposing values, each to its own square, such that the protagonist color appears darker or lighter depending on which color it's sitting next to. You don't have to use black and white as I have in this case. You could use dark blue and light yellow, for example, to achieve opposing values. So this pair is called opposing values. When you bounce your eyes back and forth between these two, the effect is that the turquoise on the left looks a little darker against the white, and it looks slightly lighter when you place it against the black. Pair B. So for the second set of squares, apply the protagonist color in a shape at the center of each square. Apply 2 colors of drastically opposing intensities into the rest of each of those squares, such as where the edges where the squares meet appear to vibrate. So on the left, the opposing intensities are, I've created a dull gray. I've mixed some black and white together to create this gray. You could also create a dull color in another way by mixing complementaries together, or you could add a tint by adding some white, or you could add a tone by adding some gray to a color. And then the other square, you must put a color of equal intensity to your protagonist color. In this case, I chose red. And what's happening here, when 2 complementary colors are placed right next to each other, you get this kind of electricity. So see if you can choose the complementary color of the protagonist color to create an electrical vibration between the two. It's a very enjoyable color effect. And pair C is you apply the protagonist color to the center, and then to apply two drastically different hues. One hue should be close in hue to your protagonist color. So for example, on the left, I have placed a bluish hue next to my blue-green protagonist, and on the right, I've placed a yellowish green, which is closer to my blue-green. And so you can see what's happening here is that when placed against the bluish hue, the turquoise, my protagonist color, it's a bit more vibrant. It has its green naturalness. It even takes on a bit of a warmness, But then when it's placed next to a yellowish green, because it's close to the green, and a yellow green is more powerful and more vibrant, right? It's warmer. It makes this blue feel cooler and even a little grayer. So see if you can make the same protagonist color lose its intensity by placing a hue of a slightly greater intensity next to it. And this is the bezeled effect. So for the bezeled effect, the instructions are basically the goal of this is it's like a little challenge to see if you can change all four colors that are in a square together by simply changing the background of all of them. So I want you to create a set of 4 3x3 squares, reproduce the color patterns here, take your time, mix the colors closely as possible. The goal here is to effectively alter each of the four protagonist colors, violet, orange, blue, and yellow, by changing the background color. Because of this, it is best to start by putting the 4 colors on first, and then mixing the background, and then laying that in afterward to see if you can change it. Cool, guys. That's the assignment. I'm going to do a little demo of some color mixing just to get you guys going. What's up, class? Welcome to the demo. I am going to do just a quick demonstration to get us cooking for our homework this week. I'm not going to do the whole project, just start working with a bit of things, get you set up. As you can see, I got my palette paper, I have canvas paper, I have some brushes, and I have some water, and I have the lovely Dick Blick Studio Acrylic set with my colors here. So quickly, I'm just going to set up my palette the way I like to do it. And you guys can do it however you want, but this is a nice organized way that's really worked for me. And that is, I like to put the white in a corner. I like to add a little extra white, but a little more white than the other colors. Then I like to sort of work my way from warms to do like a side of warms and a side of cools. So I'm going to do my warms vertically, yellow. Remember, yellow is the closest to white. So then that's where I put my yellow, working outward from the value spectrum. Then I got my red's a little broken. Got my red, blue, bop it on there. Then I'm going to put my blue and my green up here. Here, and then the green goes here. And then my darkest color, I forgot to mention I have a little rag. That's very helpful. I recommend having a little napkin or a rag with you to wipe your fingers. And then I put the black down to the other side. I usually don't use too much black just because it's not really necessary. And also I forgot to mention I have my palette knife right here. Beautiful palette knife. Cool. So the first thing I want to do is establish my protagonist color. So I'm just going to pretty much go off of the assignment. So I'm going to get a scoop of green. And the way I'll get to that, I want to lighten it up with just a little bit of white. Now see how little white I took? When you mix color, you just want to mix little bits at a time to liven that up. And if you mix blue and green together, it's going to still be pretty bright. You're not going to lose too much value. But first I'm just going to lighten up my green just with little bits of white at a time. It's like you just want to take little drops of it, right? And I want a little bit of blue just to make my beautiful turquoise. And as you can already see, it lost a little bit of its vibrance, but it's still pretty juicy. Not going to trip too much about it. Nice turquoise. So this is like a tinted, slightly tinted blue-green, and we'll get into what tints and shades in. So you want to mix it up real nice. Okay, cool. Cool. So remember, the first step is you got your, I'm going to rinse my palette knife, wipe it off with the rag so it's nice and clean for next time. So remember, the first thing you want to do is to get yourself two squares. I have a 4" by 4" square next to another 4" by 4" square. I used a ruler, which is right here. That was very precise, and I want you to be the same. But the shape in the middle were your protagonist color. So let's just, for the fun, you can mix a little water, but really be careful. You don't want too much water. So this is going to be my protagonist color. Lay it on nice thick. That way we could see it on its own. Protagonist. So you want to mix a lot of this because you're going to use it. So I think I'm actually going to mix a bit more of this just to have it, because I want to use it for the whole assignment and I don't want to have to match it. You know, you want to make sure you have enough color. Don't run out. That'll probably do it. Nothing too crazy. Oh, there's something that you want to keep your colors in a nice little pile so they don't dry out. Acrylic paint has a tendency to dry out kind of quickly. So yeah, that'll be my protagonist color. And I don't have to be too precise about what I'm going to do with it. I just need the shape to be a solid shape. So I'm kind of, oops, guess I'll do a, it's okay if that happens. Got a happy accident, go with it. You're going to throw your shape right in the middle. Lay in a nice flat. See how nice and flat it is? And if you got to do 2 layers, do 2 layers. That's totally allowed. Boom. That's one of them. That doesn't have to be in the middle. It could be somewhere funky. So I'm just going to try and get the same shape. Doesn't have to be exactly the same, but pretty close. Because we're going to play with our... So as you guys know, I'm into drawing. I'm into comics. So I like to draw with paint. So I don't really sweat too much. I like to let the shape be what it wants to be. But I want flat edges. That's super crucial here. It's okay if it stands up, if the paint has a little mountains on it, because that means you got plenty of paint. Boom, got your paint, bam. Okay, good. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to get the edges right better. So the reason I don't want, you can see it's a little different shape, that's okay. But look, if you add a bit of water to the acrylic, it gets more flowy, but also, as you can see down here, it gets more translucent. So the more water, the more translucent, because the pigment gets diluted. So the more water you add, the more diluted the pigment gets, as you can also see right here. Now this is a really good way to get some nice gradients going with just dilution. That's essentially the secret to beginning your journey into gradients, if that's what you want to be doing, but I'm not really worried about that in this class. Just show you a quick little. So I just added some more water, and I'm taking the gradient, a wet gradient, all the way down from back to front, working the paint wet into wet. But not just doing this to kill time while my paint dries and not really worrying about it too much, but that's just a quick example. Anyway, we don't really want to worry about that. We want flat, chunky paint. Cool? So try and keep your workspace clean. I am not a very clean person, so I'm always a mess, which is fine, but it's best to keep it as clean as you can. Cool, guys. So next I'm going to clean my brushes as best as I can. I have a special thing I'm going to show you. This is a secret tool I use when I'm painting. It's just a bit of water and a aerosol, and I just spritz my palette to keep my paint wet. Just a little bit. Not too much, just a little. Cool, so back to cleaning my brushes. Cool, so the first make sure your brushes are nice and dry. You don't want any extra old paint. You want to keep them as clean as possible and dry them out. Cool. Right. All right. So next, so you can either let your paint dry totally right now, or you can move into the next phase, which is mixing. So I'm going to try and mix. So the next one is, the first assignment is light value versus dark value. So what that essentially means is, with the light background, I'm going to try and make the green appear darker in value, and with the dark background, I'm going to try and make this green appear lighter. So let's see if we can do that. I'm not going to do pure black. I'm going to try like a blue black. So I'm going to mix black and blue together. Essentially what that means is I'm shading the blue down so it's darker, right? A shade of blue, mixing black and blue together. It's going to be pretty dark. I could go, if I want to make it a little bit of violet, a little purple, I add red, okay? But I'm just going to make it a nice black blue. Cool. So that looks pretty good, right? And then for my light, remember, you could use white and you could use pure black, but I'm going to make some colors because I like colors and I want to still play with colors. So then I'm going to clean my palette knife. Nice and clean. Hands a little dirty, not a problem. And then I'm going to make a bright yellow. So I just want a little bit of yellow and like a lot of white. Okay? So this will be my light. So what this is a tint of yellow. I made a shade of blue because I added black, and I'm making a tint of yellow because I'm adding white. That looks pretty good. I'm going to add more white. When you're lightening up something like a lot, you could add a big chunk of white. But like what I did with the green, the blue-green, I didn't want to change it too rapidly. So I just, added little bits. But nice, mix it. See how nice I'm mixing it so it's not marbled or streaky, it's just one flat color. Cool. And you could use a brush for this. I like to use a palette knife. palette knife. So cool. I'm gonna give my stuff a little spritz. Keep it not too wet, but a little bit wet. Then I'm gonna clean my palette knife again, throw it in the water. Cool, so my colors are pretty dry. They're probably not crazy dry. But so I'm gonna start with the light, right? And get some color on the brush. Get a nice color. And then real steady hand. You want to put your brush right up against the green, but not touching it, and move along the green so it's flat, right up against that green. And then you could brush the rest out. I'm going to start with going around the edge, and then work the square at the end, and I'll show you a little. So I like to have my canvas paper taped down. You can't really see, but I added a little bit of tape because when I'm mixing color, I don't want the paper to move around. I want it to be nice and flat. But for my canvas that I'm painting on, it's okay because sometimes you want to rotate to get the best angle. Like in this case, I'm changing the angle of the paper so I could throw this paint down the most convenient way possible for my arm. You kind of want to so in this case, I kind of put the brush down and let my wrist just pull. So I'm just using this wrist motion, keeping it straight and simple. Sometimes I use my shoulder and elbow, or my whole arm for longer lines, but for little ones, just keep it super simple and just use my wrist. Again, put the brush down and just run it, pull with the wrist. Brush down. I'm a sloppy boy, so I make mistakes, but try not to for this demo. Brush down, pull with the wrist. And it's okay if the paint isn't perfectly smooth. You got mountains, you got chunks. That's okay. Thick paint is like that. Oop, I got a little green in the yellow. So if you see that happens, throw that brush in the water, clean it, or change brushes. So you want to keep your colors nice and flat. So I'm going to rotate my canvas again. Remember? And then hit the edge, and now it's real wet, so I'm going to be super careful. And guys, also you can wait for your color to dry. You can wait for your green to dry if you want. I'm going to try and pull it off without it rockstar mode. So there we go. I got it surrounded. Now I'm just going to do the same bit with the edge. I'm going to show you on the dark a different way to do this. But for now I'm just showing you the technique I use, because doing things by hand is a great way to practice your paint application skills. So let that straight line there, nice. Rotate and pull. So right now I'm using my wrist and my shoulder, or my wrist and my elbow to get this straight line. And I'm running right along the pencil, almost pretty much covering the pencil line. So I don't want to see that. And then if I got extra paint, I'll just paint it out in my square. Boom. Rotate, get more paint. And the brushes it's great to have new brushes for this because you want a nice chiseled edge. So rotate and pull. You use your wrist and your elbow, or just your wrist, and then if it gets too skinny, boom, hit it like that. Paint the rest out. I'm going to paint over my little green area that you can't probably even see. Then I'm going to rotate again and finish the square. This time I'm just going to use my wrist. So paint. Just finished it out like that. Cool. So that's now what one of them's gonna look like. That's the one that my green's gonna look darker in relationship to the yellow. So I'm just getting some new rag because mine's all painty. And so if you notice here, I got my wet. I just want to do an example because you can, this green here is just chunky, no water, straight up paint, right? But if you add a bit of water and want to water it down a bit, which if you want a transparency, you can do that. But also, you can also build up layers towards opacity with multiple layers of transparent paint. So you can see that as it builds, it gets more and more opaque. And that's a technique that painters and other painters use to get a very flat surface. Because if it's like, if I'm hitting it super chunky, like I've done, just because that's the quickest way to get a flat, opaque shape. And that's my goal for this assignment. But if your goal is smooth surface, if that's what you're trying to go, you might want to add a bit more water and do layers of transparent color to get a flat, opaque shape. Cool, so now I'm gonna give my paint a little spray, keep it moist. Now I'm gonna move over here to my, make sure your brush is nice and dry because I don't want any water. I'm going to load up my black blue, my dark, and I'm going to see if I can make my, so you want a nice amount of paint on the edge of the brush. I don't know if you can see that. Oh yeah, you can. Beautiful. Cool. So wrist and hold it right up against the edge of my green and just pull with the wrist. Try not to mix the color, just lay it on flat. Boom. Nice, that's what I want. And then if you have any extra paint on your brush, you just paint it out. Painting it out means just fill extra space. Because remember, you can get a more opaque plane shape if you have a few layers. So I'd rotate again, get a nice angle. Got a little weird round shape here. Pull with the wrist. And I could already see that this green I laid down is not as flat as I want it to be. I could see the paper through it, and I don't want that. I want it to be perfectly flat. I'm going to paint this out. Great. Now I'm going to rotate again. Remember, you keep your palette paper taped down, and you keep your, this brush is a little too fat, so I'm just going to put it in my teeth, and I'm going to grab a different brush, a smaller brush. Rotate, get more color, and pull. Run right up against the edge of the green. Run right up against the edge of the green, but don't mix into the green. It's got to be perfect flat colors right next to each other. And then I'll brush it out, brush it out, brush it out. Cool, I'm going to show you guys a little trick. You can do this if you wish. You don't have to. If you take a little bit of artist tape, right? This is for straight edges. I like to do it by hand, but you could lay your tape right along the line that you have. And you got to make sure you use your fingernail or something, pencil, to really push it onto the canvas so it gets into the teeth of the canvas. I'm just going to do a little corner. I won't do the whole. Let's do a couple of them. And this part is a little different, okay? So you want to get your color on your brush, right? Like this. But then you want to brush it out a bit so it's a little bit dry, right? So it's on there, but it's not chunky. And then what you do is down here, you brush away from the tape. So the reason being is that you don't want the paint really, because it's like a liquid material, it's gonna want to bleed under the tape. So you want to avoid that by starting on the tape and brushing into the canvas. And this one you might actually have to do a couple layers. That's why I don't really like to do it, because it takes more time. But let's see how I do. I'm adding a little more paint. We'll see if it bleeds. Cool. So we got that. And then you grab the tape and pull it off, and you got a good enough edge for the sake of this assignment and most things. So if you guys want to do that, that's totally fine. But if you want to do by hand, that's totally allowed as well. Cool, guys. So let's take a look at this. So as you can see, my green is a little bit transparent. I'm seeing some canvas through the green. So what I'm going to do, I want to let this dry, and then I'm going to add another layer of green to it. So if you notice that happening with your painting, you want to let the green dry and then add another layer on top of it. So I'm gonna do that. While I'm waiting for it to dry, I'm just gonna wash my brushes. And when I'm washing my brushes, I don't want to drip onto the canvas, because that'll happen for me. So just to recap, when you do this assignment, some of the goals are flat shapes of color set right next to each other, opaque, and each pairing of squares should try and achieve a different effect. So right now, my effect is I would say it's sort of working, but not as good as I'd like to. I feel like I could have when I'm looking at this, the greens still appear. Oh, no, it's kind of working. The more I look at it, the green against the black does appear to be lighter than the green against the yellow. So right now, just to wrap up this assignment, this demo, I'm going to add another level of green on top of my other green. And this one you could apply it however works. It doesn't have, it should go as close to the edge as possible, but as long as it covers all the spots where you see the canvas, then you'll be in good shape. I'm kind of laying it down like a cake, like a plaster trowel, or like a cake icing. I like it very thick. It helps me get the colors activating. Great, that is much, much better. Now I'm hoping my dark is dry enough to do this, because if it's not, then sometimes you can end up pulling the color off, but it's looking pretty good. So I'm adding another level of green, so I am achieving the effect. You can't really achieve the effects that we're looking for unless the colors are nice and flat. If there's any variation in, oops, gotta remix that. If there's any variation in color or transparency, then you're gonna get some effects that are, oh, I see what happened. I dripped a little bit of water. That's okay. I'm gonna let that dry and then do a little final coat. So I was saying, if there's areas like you can see right here, the difference between right here, which is lighter, and right here, which is a bit darker, that's because this had more water in it, and just a tiny drop, and it made it so that you could see the canvas through. So you could see how sensitive paint is. And this exercise is just about technique and control. We'll rotate, because I want to get this final line on there so nice and perfect. And as you can see, I got a little spot on my dark, and that little spot is from the drop of water that I didn't even notice happened, but it did. So all I gotta do now is wait for that to dry, and then add that extra bit of green to get the effect. And then also I would fill in the black. But I'm not gonna do that because we're already at a 30-minute demo and I want you guys to get started. So yeah, that's how I want you guys to apply the color here. You can see the effect is working. I can see it better with my eyes than with the camera, but this green appears to be lighter slightly and a little bit duller. It's as if the black took out some of its vibrancy, and this green has a little bit more saturation and luminance, but it's also darker. And that's just an example of what we were discussing in the lecture, how colors only work, they become themselves when they are in proximity in relationship to other colors. Cool, guys. Thanks for listening. Let me know if you have any questions. So that's the lecture, guys. Thank you so much for watching this week, and I hope you enjoyed it. Good job on homework, and I look forward to seeing more work.